essentially kind of what is the ideology of the moment. It is, let's call it like hyper liberal individualism. The
Sure.
perspective is on yourself, like you said. The WASP police failed, and there's no one in their wake. There's their children are on Epstein's island, getting stimulated from every corner, maybe
Right.
rising in the status ranks that are already there, but not really interested in creating anything new. um, you know, I think to me that it feels very hard to dislodge that perspective because it is a comfortable one. It kind of tingles in the right places. The lizard brain is pretty chill,
Mhm.
being stimulated by all of these things. And if you are also have kind of a materialist worldview, there isn't really much to anywhere to reach out. If what where does the hero myth come from, or does the inspiration, or does it have to be something metaphysical that comes into play, or is there a way to I don't know, to build elite ideology in a very secular way where the dreams of the future are enough?
Yeah, so I think you're asking essentially like the spiritual question within this whole thing. I think within the materialist worldview, um, even you look at the commitments of people who are, having fun on yachts with underage girls and so on, all the things that they do. Um, what is going on there is it's not they like don't have a spiritual commitment, it's that they have a spiritual commitment to the pleasures of the self, and like that's what they're inspired by, that's the only thing that they could think to do with their power. Now obviously this is like a small segment of kind of the current elite, that's one faction I think. But I think to your point, like individualist sort of liberal individualism, unfortunately, has come to be essentially that for a lot of different orientations. It's essentially that like we're focused on the self. Now, I don't see this as being a consequence of like a materialist worldview or something. This is rather well, it's just orthogonal to that. Or materialism is about like your metaphysics, like what is the world made out of? It's not about what's important, because you still have what is essentially a transcendent commitment. It's just to your own titillating pleasure rather than to something that you want to accomplish or some principle you want to serve. And so I see it as totally orthogonal to the metaphysical question. Um, Mind you, I think if you think clearly about the metaphysics, you realize like what the hell's the point of sort of stimulating the self? It's not actually interesting. But maybe you realize that anyways without resorting to metaphysics. I think what's happened with liberal individualism as it has ended up constructed, I think in its original conception, it was actually this really interesting idea. It was, we're going to liberate these powerful, strong individuals from established dogmas to enable them to be the visionaries who are like pushing things forward. And they're going to actually build visions, these transcendent visions. The individuals are going to build transcendent visions that they then go and mobilize society behind. This is heroic individualism. That was, as far as I can tell, like the original conception of individualism as sort of believed by Mills, and even I was reading Emerson the other day. Like this is how they think about that stuff. Um, but it became this thing of like, oh, we're just going to retreat into the pleasures of the self. And I think it's like in some way because the system we actually got was about stopping thought on the big questions. And rather than trying to answer the big questions with this exploratory individualistic process, it actually became about stopping thought. It became, Karl Popper's, open society and its enemies, which is to say, we have to destroy anything that might actually change anything, and hold this like permanent stasis of like false possibility. That's sort of like Popper's idea summed up in in my negative reading of it. But the so there's this question of like, what then can we be inspired by? How can we get out of that? And I think it's just, when you view this as a question of sort of just ideology, it's like, what are you committed to? What do you want? Make these things, like, these things are in fact on equal footing. Like, individualism is on equal footing with, forms of theism and forms of, some glorious vision that you might have. And it's just like, which one are you most compelled by? Because they are actually arbitrary. They are just values. It's which one resonates. They're not things that can be proved. You can certainly like challenge them. You can find little contradictions, like, okay, the endpoint of individualism is psychopathy, right? Because you actually don't care about other people. And if you do care about other people, well, then you have some synthesizing principle to do that. And then that is this vision that you're chasing. And they tried to get out of that with utilitarianism, where it can be like still agnostic about the individuals, but somehow synthesize them together. But like, if you examine utilitarianism a bunch and you really think about it, it's actually, and you think about its actual consequences, and you decide whether you like those consequences, it's actually kind of abhorrent. It's evil. I won't go into that, but like, utilitarianism is a fairly evil ideology when you actually take it seriously. So rather, what you inherently have this question of, okay, what is the vision that I have for the cosmic order and my place within that cosmic order? And once you're actually thinking about that, you've escaped kind of the thought stopper that I think characterizes our dominant sort of philosophical position. Then there's this question of just, again, which visions are we compelled by? What, and maybe this is where the metaphysics comes in, but it's certainly where the visions come in. And I think it doesn't have to be religious necessarily, or, well, it doesn't have to be religious in the sense that most
cosmic order. So there is something. Your interpretation of cosmic order is
So it doesn't have to be religious in the sense that most people mean. It does have to be religious in the sense of like, the original meaning of religious, like religio, binding, right? It's like, are you bound by some system of principles and transcendent values? And it's like, yes, you're going to have some essentially religious system. I think, though, people get this weird idea that the secular modern scientific worldview is not a religious worldview. And of course they will admit that, oh yeah, science is a religion, like once you like poke it. But people don't take that seriously as like, maybe it's a religion that we could believe in. It's just that, like, I think, again, this thought stopper thing, in one reading, this is an interesting reading I've heard, the thought stopper is it's a reaction, a fear reaction to what science implies, like an actual scientific cosmology. And because an actual scientific cosmology, when you take evolution seriously, you take the cosmology seriously, you take technology seriously, and you extrapolate those things out, you get interesting, you get a view of things that can very easily be taken as an essentially like religious vision of a certain kind of progress, and a religious vision of how society works and what society is for and what we are for, and so on. And like, that work hasn't really been done, so I'm not going to say too much about what details that might have. But in my belief, if you actually do that work, you end up with something that is very closely compatible, if not suggestive, of essentially the monotheism, like Western style, kind of like Christian monotheism. And it's like, the work has not been done to update Christianity in light of science or to extend science into theology.